Part 1 of this series is about coming up with ideas. Even though you are following along with this tutorial, you are free to deviate along the way. I'm teaching you the steps, but I hope as you follow along with these steps, you'll make your own variations. So rather than me telling you what you are going to make, I want to share my process of how I come up with ideas for the game, and you can come up with your own ideas. The most important thing is writing everything down. Every time you start thinking about the game you want to make, pull out a notebook and a pen and jot down everything you are thinking about. I like to do this process on paper with a pen to prevent myself from deleting or erasing any of the ideas in this early stage. Right now, you don't want to limit things. You want as many ideas as possible. It's really helpful to split your ideas into categories: characters, or who, setting, or when and where, and gameplay, the what. So let's start with who. Who is the player going to play as? Where are they at and what are they doing? Those are the questions we're trying to answer. Normally I do this on paper, but for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to be writing with my drawing tablet. As I'm going along and writing down ideas, I find it really helpful to occasionally draw a picture of what I'm thinking about. You don't need to be an artist to draw your ideas on paper, and it doesn't matter if your drawings aren't any good. All that matters is that you have some visual representation of the thoughts in your head. This helps with the ideation process. The intention with this is to take something you are imagining in your mind and turn it into something that you could show to others, or at least show to yourself. As I'm thinking about who the playable character is, I also might want to start thinking about who could be the potential NPCs, or non-playable characters. These could be enemies, or they could be other characters in the world that the player can talk to, perhaps to give the player quests. It can be helpful to think about the NPCs in relation to the playable characters, since some NPCs only make sense with certain playable characters. We want to make sure that the NPCs and the playable characters make sense to be in the same world together. As ideas come to you, you can write them down or draw them out. For example, when you're thinking about the character you're using, maybe I'm thinking of using this puppy, and maybe I'll have the toddlers as the NPC, and I want to think about maybe what is the puppy doing, and so maybe I have this bouncy ball that the character can play with. Once you have a good long list of the who are the playable characters and non-playable characters, you can move on to the where, or when. This is the setting. And sometimes you only need to focus on where the game takes place, but depending on the context of the game, you might also want to consider when the game takes place. For example, does it take place in the future or in the past? If you're dealing only with the present, then you're really only focusing on where the game takes place. And just like with the who brainstorm, we want to occasionally be drawing pictures of ideas to help with the ideation phase. The final category is what. This could be the actions the player is doing, different things that the player will encounter in the world, or challenges they might face, or what is their goal. Sometimes as you're brainstorming, you might bounce back and forth between the different categories, especially if something in one category gives you an idea for something in a different category. There's no particular order that you need to do this, so feel free to bounce around between them as ideas strike you. During the what category, you might start to break things into categories and group different ideas together. For example, if I want some kind of puzzle mechanics, I might take a moment to brainstorm all the different kinds of puzzle ideas that I could have. With puzzles in particular, it's important to be specific because just writing down the word puzzle doesn't mean very much. A puzzle can mean so many different things, so you want to make sure that you are coming up with specific ideas for how a puzzle could work in your game. Once we have some basic ideas of the kinds of challenges the player might face and the objectives they might have, we do want to be very specific about what the win condition would end up being, or the overall goal of the game. And so we want to start a separate category, which is part of what, but this would be what is the goal for the player? What do they have to do to win? Some games don't actually have a win condition. Some games go on forever, essentially a wave-based game where the goal is really just to survive for as long as you can. And there's no real win condition except to beat your previous best. Once you have a whole lot of ideas to work with, you want to start picking out which ones you'd like to move forward with. You're not committing to anything yet. You might make a lot of changes along the way when you start actually implementing things in the game engine, but you want to have a plan of action. You want to know what you are going to start off trying to make. And you don't want to delete anything. You don't want to erase any of the ideas from this brainstorm. It's really helpful to have all of the ideas that you've come up with along the way. But you can take the ideas that you are most interested in and copy them into a section that you can highlight and reference when you start trying to build this thing. One of the things that you want to be thinking about when drawing your ideas is thinking about how is the user going to be viewing this. And there are a lot of different options you have for your camera angles, and it can be difficult to replicate this by drawing, especially if you are not a traditional artist. So this is a good time to start doing a little bit of research and exploring some existing games and finding some references. Along the way, for finding references, you not only want to look at the different camera angles and views that you might use for how the player is going to view the game, but also different art styles that you could use and different games that you could reference for game mechanics. These are the three things that are really useful to have reference games for. And no matter how original your idea is, there's probably a similar game out there that you can use from a reference. So all you have to do is just do a little bit of research and try to find something that you can draw inspiration from. When you're considering the camera view, you do want to think about a couple of things. For one thing, how much space do you want the character to take up on the screen? The more space taken up by the character, the less you'll be able to see of the environment, and this will affect the gameplay, since it limits the player's ability to see what they need to do next. On the other hand, if the playable character is too small, they may be unrecognizable, or the player may feel disconnected, or you might actually have too large of a view of the space, and you don't have any hidden information from the player. So take some time to find some reference games that you can draw inspiration from for the camera view and angle, for the art style, and for the gameplay. And while you're doing this, you might also want to start considering the audio style. A lot of times we focus a lot on the visual style that we're referencing, but it's important to also have an idea for the audio style. I've decided to move forward with the robot puppy idea, and in particular, I have a specific robot puppy in mind. I'm remembering from my childhood the techno robot puppy that I got one year for Christmas, and this is the sort of source of inspiration that I'm going to use for the main character. In terms of the gameplay and the character, the worldview, the camera angle, and the art style, I have a few different games I'm going to reference. I'm thinking of League of Legends for the camera perspective, so a very pulled back third-person view where you can see quite a lot of space around the player. I'm also thinking maybe a sort of a hybrid between the League of Legends view and the Crossy Roads view, where the Crossy Roads is a little bit closer to the character, but also a little bit more uniform in the amount of space that you can see and very rigid, mostly due to it being a voxel-style game. On the subject of voxel-style games, I'm thinking maybe something along the lines of the Dragon Quest Builders game for the art style, where it's sort of very low poly, maybe bordering on voxel style, but with a little bit of visual flair to it. I also am pulling some other games that have robots in them to reference, because I want to have different robot characters to draw inspiration from. So I'm looking at Portal and Borderlands for the visual style and the aesthetic of the robots that they have. In terms of gameplay, I'm thinking of maybe a 3D kind of environment, puzzle, platformer kind of game, like the Mario 3D games. I'm also drawing some inspiration from the Lucky's Tale, which is really similar in gameplay style to the 3D Mario games, but I played Lucky's Tale a bit more recently, so I think this is a little bit more recent in my memory to draw inspiration from. As these ideas and references and inspiration is coming together, you want to have one single document that is an easy go-to location for you to find all of the ideas you've come up with so far, and specifically ideas that you've settled on, and a quick reference of visual style references. So I like to do a one-page design document that is just a quick and easy way to organize all of the information that you've come up with so far. I have a template here that shows the breakdown of how I put together a one-page design document, starting with the game title at the top, then an overview section, which includes an elevator pitch and the list of the people working on the game, the goal of the game in a short one or two sentences, and a section on a little more detail into how the gameplay works. What does the player actually do moment to moment, including a list of obstacles and mechanics. The mechanics are the verbs or actions that the player can do. And then at the bottom, I do a thumbnail section of art style or concept images, which is meant to keep everything on one page and very concise and condensed, but to have a quick visual reference section that I can look at anytime I need to remember something about how the character or environment is meant to look. So once I go through the process of filling this in, I come up with a nice organized one-page design document. I find it really important to pick a working title at the beginning of a project. You might think that the title is not very important and the title is most likely going to change in the process of working on the game, but it's really helpful to have something to refer to your game as when you're talking to someone, and having a name for it just so you have a way to refer to it. And it's fine if it's a working title and you're almost definitely going to change it. The title doesn't need to be very good at this point. It just needs to be a way for you to sum up what your game is in 2 or 3 words. In the next video, part 2 of this tutorial, we will move on to starting to draw out a top-down layout and designing our playable level for the game. If you're enjoying this so far, I hope you'll hit that like and subscribe button so you can follow along on this journey.